The first time Ava saw the place in person, she felt as though she had stepped off the edge of the world. The long gravel road stretched ahead behind her, flanked by dense pine forest whose trunks leaned inward like silent sentinels. The sky was a flat gray, low with clouds, and a cold wind whispered through the trees, making their branches creak as if speaking in a language she almost understood. She could see, off to her left, a tarn of dark water, a lake or pond she hadn't yet mapped, its surface still, reflecting the cloud bank like a fractured mirror. The air smelled of damp earth and pine resin. Every exhale she made came out as a little ghost of vapor in front of her face. Ava's car idled at the lip of a small clearing, the tires crunching on loose stones. She turned off the engine, clutching her notebook in her lap. The notebook had come to her in a half-dream, words, sketches of old buildings, half-formed maps, and fragments of a journal from someone long gone. She was a writer by trade, but what she carried felt more like a puzzle piece forcibly pressed into her hands. She looked around, saw only the forest and the dark water, and heard in the distance a lonely caw of a crow. Her heart thumped, part excitement, part dread. She stepped out onto the gravel, her boots crunching. She pulled her jacket tighter, though the chill was subtle. She surveyed the area. To her right, a narrow footpath that disappeared into the forest, ahead, the lake's dark edge, and behind her, the road that had brought her here, winding and vanishing gradually among the trees. She walked a few steps, tracing a path to the water's edge. A thin mist rose from the lake, curling like tendrils of smoke, obscuring where water ended and forest began. She knelt, running a finger through the cold water. It tasted of moss and clay. As she stood, she thought she heard something, a distant footstep, or perhaps the brush of something heavy against undergrowth. She froze. The only movement, though, was the mist. Nothing else stirred. She checked her phone, no signal. Her voice was quiet when she muttered, "Hello?" No echo. No reply. She exhaled slowly, collected herself. She walked back toward her car, but paused. In the clearing, at the base of a tree, lay something half-buried, a journal, its cover damp and faded. The initials, E.M., were faintly embossed. Her pulse quickened. She knelt and lifted it, brushing away pine needles. The pages were brittle, the script cramped and rushed. On the first page, in shaky ink, "They are watching. They always watch when you think you're alone." She closed the journal, hugged it to her chest. The wind seemed to sigh through the pines. Ava knew, then, that this place was not empty, that stories buried here pulsed with life. She climbed back into her car, heart racing, and stared across the lake. Something in the far trees moved, a shape, dark and crooked. She blinked, it vanished. She didn't dare look again just yet. She whispered a promise to herself. Tomorrow she would explore deeper. Tonight she would camp, under the sky, near the lake, read the journal, find its secrets. Her fingers itched to open it again. And maybe, just maybe, what lay ahead would change everything. That night, Ava decided against driving back. The journal sat on her passenger seat, its damp cover whispering possibilities she couldn't ignore. She pitched her small tent near the clearing, setting it up by the glow of her flashlight, the lake just beyond the trees. The silence here was so complete it pressed against her ears, broken only by the occasional rustle of branches. It wasn't like city quiet, this was deeper, a vacuum of sound, the kind that made even the crunch of her boots seem intrusive. After she built a small fire, she pulled the journal into her lap and cracked it open. The handwriting was uneven, the ink blotched as if written in haste. The entries began plainly enough, notes about weather, hunting, and the isolation of the forest. But soon they grew stranger, references to eyes glinting in the tree-lean at night, and sketches of distorted figures, drawn with shaky lines. One page stopped her cold. In hurried strokes, the writer had scrawled, "Do not let them see your fire. It calls them." Ava glanced at her own campfire, embers glowing orange. The words prickled under her skin. She quickly closed the book and smothered the flames, leaving only the faint glow of her flashlight. Darkness swallowed the clearing, the mist from the lake thickening, almost as though it crawled closer. Ava told herself it was just superstition, an old trapper's paranoia, but her pulse said otherwise. Her eyes darted toward the line of trees. The shadows there seemed heavier now, bending inward like watching forms. She tried to steady her breathing, telling herself it was exhaustion. When the wind rose again, she heard something layered in it, not just the groan of trees, but a whisper. Faint, as if carried across the lake. She strained to hear, holding her breath. The sound came again, clearer this time, not one voice, but many, like overlapping murmurs, unintelligible yet insistent. Her skin crawled. She snapped off her flashlight, plunging herself into complete darkness, as if hiding from something that might be watching. The whispers ceased instantly. Ava sat frozen, the journal clutched in her lap, staring into the pitch black. After what felt like hours, she crawled into her tent and zipped it shut, though the fabric felt like the thinnest barrier imaginable. The last thing she heard before sleep stole her was a splash from the lake, as though something enormous had broken the surface. She didn't dare peek out. Morning, she told herself. Just make it to morning. When dawn finally came, Ava emerged from the tent with stiff muscles and a dry throat. The fire pit was cold, ringed by a dusting of ash. For a moment, she wondered if the night before had been a dream, the whispers, the splash in the lake. But the journal lay on the camp table, open to the page warning about fire, as though daring her to dismiss it. The air was unnaturally still, the kind of morning when even birdsong seemed absent. Mist still clung low to the water's edge, reluctant to lift with the sun. Ava stretched, rubbing her arms against the chill, and decided to explore the narrow footpath she'd noticed the day before. She slung her backpack on, journal tucked safely inside, and set off. The trail wound through towering pines, the ground soft with moss and old needles. Her boots left faint prints in the damp earth. Every so often, she stopped and listened. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant drip of water or the snap of a branch under her step. She found herself checking over her shoulder, though nothing ever appeared behind her. After about a mile, she came across something unexpected, the remains of a cabin, half collapsed and swallowed by moss. Its roof had caved in long ago, leaving only a leaning frame of logs. The windows were dark voids, edges softened by rot. She hesitated at the threshold, then stepped inside, the boards creaking under her weight. Dust motes swirled in the slanted morning light, and on the far wall, carved deep into the wood, were words, "Do not follow them." Ava's stomach tightened. She wasn't sure if "them" meant the whispers, the watchers, or something worse. Among the debris, she noticed an overturned crate. She pried it open and found inside a bundle of brittle papers and a rusted lantern. The papers were pages torn from a different journal, the handwriting hurried and almost identical to the one she had. The words blurred in places, but she made out fragments. They circle at night, drawn to warmth, shadows in water mirror the trees. Ava shivered. She slipped the pages into her pack, the unease rooting itself deeper in her chest. As she turned to leave, she felt that unmistakable sensation, being observed. She looked toward the collapsed doorway, and for a split second, swore she saw a silhouette move across the mist outside. Too tall, too still, like a cutout figure sliding silently between trees. She blinked and it was gone. The cabin seemed smaller then, pressing in around her. She rushed back to the trail, her breaths loud in the empty forest. The words carved on the wall echoed in her mind, "Do not follow them." But what if they were already? By the time Ava made it back to the clearing, the sun was high, pale and watery through the overcast sky. She told herself she had been imagining things in the cabin, that fear could play tricks in lonely places. But when she walked to her car, her chest tightened, the driver's door was slightly ajar. She knew she had locked it. She leaned inside, scanning the seats. Nothing seemed stolen. But on the dashboard lay a pine needle bundle tied with a strip of cloth. She hadn't left it there. She picked it up with trembling fingers. It was too deliberate, too carefully bound. Some kind of symbol. She dropped it on the gravel and kicked it away, slamming the door shut. It's fine. Just kids, hunters messing around, she muttered, though her voice shook. But when she turned the ignition, the car only coughed weakly before dying. She tried again. Nothing. The engine was as silent as the woods around her. Panic flickered in her chest. She took a long breath, willing herself to think logically. Maybe the damp air, maybe a drained battery. She had food and water, a tent, and supplies. She could last. She'd just need to wait for another vehicle on the road, except, as she thought it, she realized she hadn't seen a single car since arriving. The road that had felt like a lifeline yesterday now seemed more like a thread unraveling into nowhere. Deciding not to waste energy panicking, Ava shouldered her backpack and followed the road on foot, hoping to reach a ranger station or at least a sign of life. But after nearly 2 hours of walking, something uncanny dawned on her. The road bent and wound but always seemed to lead back toward the lake. She stopped, breathing hard, her eyes darting at the trees. Every landmark felt familiar, the same leaning pine, the same cracked boulder. She spun in place, a nausea rising as the realization sank in. The forest was folding in on itself. She returned to the clearing exhausted, her legs aching. The lake shimmered darkly, indifferent, as though mocking her failed escape. On the far shore, she saw them, shapes. Several this time, tall and thin, standing in a line between the trees. Their outlines flickered like mirages. She couldn't see their faces, only the stillness of their stance. She blinked, and they were gone. But the silence was heavier now, pressing against her skull. The words from the cabin returned to her mind, sharp and urgent, "Do not follow them." Ava's throat tightened as she whispered to herself, "But what if they're leading me?" Night crept in faster than Ava expected, as though the sun had been swallowed rather than set. She built no fire this time, remembering the warning. Instead, she sat in her tent with a lantern turned low, the journal open on her knees. Her breath fogged in the chill, though the air shouldn't have been this cold in early autumn. She flipped through the brittle pages, and found an entry marked by a smear of something dark, maybe old ink, maybe not. It read, "They do not cross water, unless called. The voices call. Do not answer." Ava's chest tightened as she recalled the whispers carried across the lake. The night was still when she first heard it again, faint at first, like the sigh of wind through the trees. Then, gradually, it shaped itself into something closer to speech. Dozens of overlapping voices, hushed and urgent. She froze, clutching the journal. The whispers didn't come from the forest this time. They rose from the lake itself, curling out of the mist as if the water itself spoke. Ava's scalp prickled, and for a heartbeat she thought she heard her own name woven among the sounds. She unzipped the tent flap just enough to peer out. The clearing was drowned in silver moonlight, the lake glimmering faintly. Mist rolled thick across its surface, and within it, shapes moved, not ripples, not fog. Figures. They stood just beneath the waterline, distorted and wavering, their faces obscured by the shifting mist. She blinked hard, but they didn't vanish. Instead, one of them lifted its head, as though looking directly at her tent. The whispers grew louder. Ava dropped the flap shut and crawled backward, heart hammering so hard she thought the figures might hear it. Her lantern flickered, guttered, and died, plunging her into suffocating darkness. The whispers pressed closer, slipping between the tent walls as if the fabric couldn't keep them out. She clamped her hands over her ears, rocking slightly, whispering to herself, "Not real. Not real. Not real." But the journal on her lap felt heavier, vibrating faintly, as though resonating with the voices. Just when she thought she couldn't take another second, silence slammed down, sudden, absolute. No whispers. No movement. Only her own ragged breathing filled the void. She sat frozen, tears on her cheeks, until she dared to breathe normally again. Then, in the suffocating quiet, a single sound broke it, a knock. 3 soft raps, slow and deliberate, against the side of her tent. The sound of the knock lingered in Ava's skull, each slow rap reverberating through her bones. She froze, every muscle rigid, her breath caught in her throat. The clearing was utterly silent again, except for the echo of her heartbeat. For a moment, she thought of unzipping the flap, tearing out of the tent, running into the trees. But the warning carved in the cabin walls stopped her: do not follow them. If she fled blindly, she feared she might walk straight into their waiting arms. Instead, she whispered to herself, stay still. Stay quiet. But the knocking came again, this time on the other side of the tent. 3 more raps. Slow. Patient. She shuffled backward, her spine pressing into the fabric of the tent wall. A terrible thought struck her: if something pressed against the canvas from outside, she'd feel it. She inched her hand toward the lantern, but it was useless, its flame snuffed out long ago. In the suffocating dark, she pressed her palm to the fabric behind her, daring to test it. The canvas was cold. Then, suddenly, it pushed back. A firm pressure, like fingers pressing against her hand from the outside. Ava yanked her hand back, stifling a cry. Her throat went dry. The pressure lingered, and then slid upward, tracing the outline of her shoulder from the outside of the tent. She couldn't take it anymore. With trembling hands, she unzipped the flap in one violent motion and thrust her flashlight beam outward. The clearing looked empty, the beam slicing through the mist. The trees were still. The lake glimmered faintly. No figures. No shapes. Just silence. Her lungs burned as she sucked in air, waiting for something to leap from the shadows. Nothing did. But when she swung the light downward, her stomach lurched. A series of damp handprints stained the fabric of her tent, circling it entirely, as though a dozen unseen figures had paced around it, dragging their palms across the canvas. Her flashlight flickered once, then steadied. She realized she couldn't stay in the tent another night, not like this. She shoved her journal and pack together and whispered, I need to move at first light. Yet even as she said it, the forest seemed to tighten around her, as though it had already decided otherwise. Ava lay awake the rest of the night, every creak of the trees like a breath at her ear, until at last a pale gray dawn bled through the fabric. She knew then, the forest wasn't just watching. It was playing with her. The morning brought no comfort. Ava emerged from the tent stiff and hollow-eyed, the journal clutched against her chest like a shield. The handprints smeared across the canvas hadn't faded; if anything, they seemed darker, as though the fabric had absorbed the night's moisture. She couldn't stay here another night. The thought of the knocking, of unseen hands dragging across her shelter, made her stomach knot. She stuffed her gear into her pack with frantic precision and turned toward the road. The gravel path stretched ahead, quiet and damp with morning dew. She walked quickly, the journal tucked into her side pocket, her eyes flicking between the trees. The further she went, the less familiar things felt. She passed boulders split by moss, trees bent at odd angles, and once, a scatter of bones, picked clean and pale against the soil. Animal, she told herself, though the ribcage looked unervingly human in shape. Her pace quickened, her breath fogging in the chill air. After nearly 2 hours of steady walking, the trees opened up into another clearing. At first, her heart leapt. A structure stood in the center. Not another collapsed ruin, but a small wooden chapel, weathered but intact, its steeple jutting above the mist. Its door hung slightly ajar, swaying faintly though no wind stirred. Ava hesitated at the tree lean, her gut twisting. But the need for answers overpowered her fear. She stepped inside. The chapel was dim, lit only by thin shafts of light cutting through cracks in the walls. Dust swirled lazily in the beams. The pews were rotted, the altar collapsed under its own weight. Yet the walls were what froze her in place, hundreds of carvings, gouged deep into the wood. Circles. Eyes. Hands. Overlapping symbols that repeated again and again. At the very front, above where the altar had once stood, a single sentence sprawled across the wall in a desperate scrawl: "The lake is the mouth." Ava staggered back, her skin prickling. The journal in her pack seemed to grow heavier, tugging at her like a stone. She pulled it out and flipped through the pages, her hands shaking. The entries lined up, descriptions of voices, of figures, of water that pulled things into itself. One unfinished line at the back stopped her cold: "The chapel is where they feed." Her breath caught. In the corner of her eye, she thought she saw movement between the broken pews. A tall shadow leaning, watching. She shut the book with a snap, her pulse roaring in her ears. Ava's breath came shallow and fast inside the chapel. The shadows between the pews seemed to lengthen the longer she stood still, stretching into human shapes that didn't move, but somehow watched. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to run, yet her legs felt locked in place. Only when the journal in her hands pulsed, yes, pulsed, as though its very spine throbbed like a heartbeat, did she snap herself out of her trance. She bolted through the open doorway, stumbling into the misty air outside. The forest greeted her with its oppressive silence, thicker now than before. Even the air seemed heavier, resisting each of her steps. She tried to follow the road she thought had brought her to the chapel, but the path had shifted, the ground sloped differently, the trees arranged themselves in patterns she didn't recognize. No matter how carefully she retraced her steps, every turn seemed to nudge her closer to the direction of the lake. It was as though the forest had decided her course for her. By midday, she stood once again on the lake's shore. The water was perfectly still, smooth as a pane of obsidian glass. She dropped to her knees in frustration, her voice breaking in a cry that rang uselessly into the mist: "Why can't I leave?" The silence answered, followed by the faintest ripple across the water's surface, one that began at the center and spread outward, as though something beneath had stirred. Ava scrambled back from the edge, her heart hammering. She opened the journal again with shaking hands, desperate for any clue. Near the back, written in cramped, frantic script, she found a new passage she was sure hadn't been there before: "The road always leads back. The forest is not theirs, it is theirs to guide. And the lake is where you will see them as they are." Her throat closed around the words. She dared glance at the water, and there, faint but clear, figures gathered beneath its surface, standing as though on the lakebed. Their heads tilted upward, their arms hanging too long, too limp. One raised a hand slowly, palm out, as if beckoning her closer. Ava staggered to her feet, shaking her head violently. "No," she whispered, backing toward the tree lean. But her heel struck something solid. She spun around and saw it, a pine needle bundle tied in cloth, identical to the one she'd found in her car, now resting at the edge of the woods. Another lay a few feet away. Then another. They formed a crooked trail leading deeper into the trees, and every bundle pointed back toward the lake. She realized with a sick chill, she wasn't being followed. She was being herded. Ava backed away from the bundles, her throat dry, her mind screaming at her to flee deeper into the woods. Yet every time she tried, the forest bent her path back toward the lake. The pines grew denser, their trunks crowding together until only one narrow corridor remained open, and it always led to the shore. She stumbled forward, panic rising, the journal thumping against her chest like an anchor she couldn't discard. By the time she reached the clearing again, she was gasping, her legs trembling. The lake was waiting. Smooth, black, eternal. The figures beneath the surface had multiplied. Dozens now, maybe more, standing shoulder to shoulder in the depths. Their forms shifted faintly, too fluid to be entirely human, their faces warped by the shimmer of water. Ava dropped to her knees in the dirt, her fists digging into the ground. She screamed, "What do you want from me?" Her voice echoed back, distorted, as though the lake itself had spoken. The journal fell open beside her, its pages riffling as if caught in a wind that didn't exist. The ink writhed on the paper, rearranging itself into fresh words. The mouth must feed. The mouth remembers. The mouth opens for you. Ava shoved it closed, bile rising in her throat. She staggered to her feet, clutching the book to her chest, tears streaking her cheeks. Every instinct begged her to resist, but the weight of the forest pressing in, the unblinking stillness of the figures, told her resistance was slipping from her grasp. The water rippled again. This time, a shape broke the surface. A hand, long, pale, impossibly thin, pressed upward through the glass-like surface, droplets cascading off its skeletal fingers. Then another hand followed, pulling at the air, as if testing the boundary between their world and hers. Ava staggered back, but her heel struck another pine needle bundle, perfectly placed at the tree-line, pointing her back to the water. She realized with dread certainty, there was no way out. Her body shook as she whispered, "No. I'm not yours." But even as she said it, the lake responded. The whispers rose once more, louder, sharper, countless voices layered into one demand that vibrated through her skull, "Come." The sound was no longer outside her. It was inside her. Her knees buckled, and the world tilted as the figures beneath the water reached higher, their hands breaking the surface again and again, waiting to take hold. The voices clawed at Ava's mind, rising in a chorus that vibrated through her teeth and skull. The figures in the lake surged closer to the surface, their pale hands reaching higher, their forms pressing upward as though the water was only a thin veil. Ava's body shook, torn between flight and surrender. Her heart screamed to run, but the forest had already shown her, there was nowhere else to go. The journal throbbed in her arms, alive, as though it wanted to leap from her grasp into the lake. In desperation, she forced the book open one final time. The pages fluttered violently, ink spilling like veins across parchment until it settled on a single, freshly written passage: "The mouth takes what it is given. The mouth releases what it is denied. Burn it, and be free." Ava's breath hitched. Her trembling fingers traced the words, half believing, half praying. For a moment, she hesitated. If the journal was the tether, destroying it might release her, or doom her. The figures pressed higher, their faceless heads now visible just below the surface, mouths opening in unison, wide and black. The whispers had become a scream inside her skull. Ava staggered to her knees, fumbling with her pack. She pulled free the rusted lantern from the chapel and a single match. Her hands shook so violently she nearly dropped them. The figures paused, their mouths frozen mid-scream, as if sensing what she meant to do. With a cry torn from the deepest part of her chest, Ava struck the match and touched it to the brittle pages. The journal caught instantly, flames racing hungrily across the paper, consuming ink and parchment alike. She hurled the burning book into the lake. For a heartbeat, silence. Then the water erupted, not with waves, but with sound. A howl, deep and cavernous, rose from the depths, shaking the ground beneath her feet. The figures writhed, their shapes distorting, breaking apart as if the fire devoured them through reflection. The lake itself boiled in pockets, steam hissing upward. Ava collapsed backward on the shore, shielding her face from the heat. When she dared to look again, the lake was calm. Empty. No figures beneath. No whispers. Only still, dark water reflecting the gray sky. The pine needle bundles had vanished from the tree-line, leaving only scattered leaves. For the first time since arriving, the forest felt empty, not alive, not watching, just quiet. Ava wept, her whole body trembling, before dragging herself to her feet. She didn't know if she was free, if she had beaten the forest or only bought herself time, but she knew one thing: she would never return.